2030 Idi anenge achipo. This slogan has gained momentum in Mbuyana's party. The question is, why now? After all, Idi is in his last term, right? In 2023, the main slogan was Idi Huchi, Chakadero for Idi. But now, the main slogan is 2030 anenge achipo. Translated and interpreted, in 2030, Idi will still be in power. What's going on here? Why has this slogan taken ZANU-PF by storm? And speaking of a storm, Sniper Storm has joined the storm of male musicians bootlicking Wicknell Chivayo to buy them cars. And every time Chivayo buys someone a car, he does it in the name of Idi. Hanzi, Idi Huchi, Idi delivers, men believed. And of course, he ends by saying, 2030, Idi anenge achipo. Is it a coincidence that Chivayo is dishing out cars only to people of influence in a season where Idi could potentially lead the country into a referendum in his bid for a third term? Just yesterday, Chivayo asked Thomas Mafumo to publicly apologize for criticizing Idi and ZANU-PF. Chivayo said that if Mkanya apologizes in public, then he will buy him a car worth over $200,000 and a house worth over $300,000. And all of this is being done in the name of Idi. Is it a mere coincidence? Well, fellow Sadza eaters, slay queens and bingers, socialites, papalites, vasnamalites, varikujgarais, nevasnamarites. Welcome to the special report. Today we are going to look at Idi's third term bid and its implications to the nation and region. We are going to draw lessons from other African presidents who tampered with term limits and the consequences that befell their nations. We will look at the politics of succession in Zimbabwe, and most importantly, we want to find out what the Constitution of Zimbabwe says about a third term. Is it possible for Idi to run again in 2028? What would be the motivation for Idi to run again? Will ZANU-PF allow him? Are the citizens going to allow him? And most importantly, will the military allow Idi to run again in 2028? Okay, so let's set the record straight because Varakasha listening. Idi hasn't publicly announced that he wants a third term, but he hasn't dispelled the rumors either. If anything, he's actually encouraging the voices that are calling for his third term. Maybe Idi is testing the waters, or rather, testing and tasting the waters. It can't be easy just to give up power after 10 years, especially when your predecessor was in power for 37 years. Can't be easy to relinquish power just like that, especially when you've spent your entire adult life as the chief enforcer of an authoritarian regime and then becoming leader of the said regime, having toppled your predecessor for that matter. You see, Idi has been a politician since 1977 when he got appointed by Robert Mugabe to head the security department of ZANU, taking over from Cletus Chigowe. That means Idi has been in active politics for 47 years, more than half of his life. Also keep in mind that he was also a guerrilla for a few years and also spent some time in prison. Add that on top of the 47 years, you immediately realize that Idi literally doesn't know life outside of politics. Well, of course, he was briefly out of action in November 2017 when he got fired by Mugabe, but it took him and Chiwenga only 18 days to regain political power. Yes, I'm assuming we're all clear that ED became president via military coup in 2017. The coup situation led to Mugabe's resignation and consequently ED's ascendancy to the presidency to finish Mugabe's term. But of course, Mnangagwa's first term in earnest started in 2018 after the harmonized elections. This is because anything less than 3 years is not considered a full term by the Zimbabwean constitution. This then means that ED is in his last term as per the current constitution, which only provides for 2 terms. And as I will demonstrate very soon, it would be a total disaster for ED to go through with his 3rd term bid. You see, 3rd terms are a curse to African constitutions. In most cases, a successful 3rd term bid ends up being a life presidency. To the best of my knowledge, there are only 2 African presidents who retired willingly after tampering with presidential term limits. These are Sam Nujoma of Namibia and of course Dos Santos of Angola. In Namibia, the constitution was changed to allow Nujoma to run for a 3rd term, but he willingly stepped down at the end of his 3rd term in 2005 and he was succeeded by Hifikepunye Pohamba. This was unprecedented. In Angola, Dos Santos willingly stepped down after being in power for 37 years. His first term lasted for over a decade because he kept postponing the presidential elections due to the civil war in that country. He was first democratically elected in 1992, which was Angola's first election since independence. But he willingly stepped down in 2017. These are the only 2 cases where African presidents who extended term limits willingly stepped down after. Because in most cases, a 3rd term creates a life presidency which sometimes ends up in a coup d'etat, with the exception of Abdoulaye Wade of Senegal, who changed the constitution in 2012 to allow himself to run for a 3rd term only to lose the election. Everyone else who violated term limits in sub-Saharan Africa either died in office, was overthrown, or is still in power today. And by the way, 3 of the 4 life presidents who died in office, Omar Bongo of Gabon, Eyadema of Togo, and Idriss Déby of Chad, were replaced by their sons. And as you know, in Gabon, Omar Bongo's son, Ali Bongo, was removed by a coup d'etat. In Cameroon, Paul Biya removed term limits in 2008, a move which has kept him in power till this day. He is 91 and still clinging on to power. Who is to say that his son, Frank Biya, won't succeed him when he dies? Tampering with presidential term limits is very dangerous because more often than not, presidents who tamper with presidential term limits do so with no intention to relinquish power. And when a leader stays in power for too long, it becomes a dynasty. This is precisely the reason why Grace Mugabe almost succeeded Robert Mugabe. Never at all allow a president to use parliament to extend or remove presidential term limits. It's a trap. Once a president doesn't have term limits or goes beyond the constitutionally allocated 2 terms, there are only 3 things that can stop such a president. Number 1, his conscience. Number 2, a coup d'etat. Number 3, death. But of course, I could have added a revolution just to make it 4 things. But really, you will find that in sub-Saharan Africa, revolutions mostly happen at the backing and instigation of the military. In fact, to call them revolutions is to be very kind. They are just coup d'etats, period. Namibians and Angolans were very lucky. Their presidents had a conscience. They willingly stepped down after going beyond 2 terms. But do you honestly think that ED has a conscience? Would he step down if we gave him another term? Why would he step down? After all, in 2017, he said that he would only be a 2-term president. So, seeking a re-election would be going against his own word. Why would you trust a man who doesn't respect his own word? It's very clear to me. If we allow ED to get a third term, then rest assured he will either die in office or be removed by a coup d'etat, just like his late boss. When a president changes the constitution to run for a third term, chances are he has no intention of leaving power at all. So now, what does the constitution say about ED's third term bid? Let's go to section 328 of the Zimbabwean constitution, which talks about how to amend the said constitution. Section 328 starts by defining what is meant by the term constitutional bill and term limit provision. It says, in this section, constitutional bill means a bill that seeks to amend this constitution. Term limit provision means a provision of this constitution which limits the length of time that a person may hold or occupy a public office. An act of parliament that amends this constitution must do so in express terms. Subsection 3 then says, a constitutional bill may not be presented in the Senate or the National Assembly in terms of Section 131 unless the Speaker has given at least 90 days notice in the Gazette of the precise terms of the bill. So firstly, let's look at what Section 131 says for the sake of context so that we are all on the same page. Section 131 lays out clearly the separation of powers between the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature, which are the three arms of government. So, laws are made in the lower house of parliament called the National Assembly. At this stage, this proposed law is called a bill. It is then taken to the upper house of parliament called Senate for further scrutiny. If the Senate is happy, then the Speaker of Parliament must cause this bill to be taken to the President for signing into law. The Speaker must also give public notice of the date the bill is presented to the President. When the President receives the bill, he must sign it into law within 21 days or send it back to Parliament with reasons if he is not happy with the constitutionality of the bill. At this stage, Parliament has two options: either to make corrections based on the President's reservations or force the President to sign the bill unchanged by a 2/3 majority. If the President is still not happy after Parliament has forced him or her to sign the bill into law, the President can send the bill to the Constitutional Court to determine its constitutionality. If the Constitutional Court says that the bill is fine, then the President has no choice but to sign the bill into law, whether he likes it or not. So, Section 131 is basically telling us how laws are made in Zimbabwe. Now, back to Section 328. This section is telling us that the first step to amending the Zimbabwean Constitution is a 90 days notice by the Speaker. It goes on to say that immediately after the Speaker has given notice of a constitutional bill in terms of subsection 3, Parliament must invite members of the public to express their views on the proposed bill in public meetings through written submissions and must convene meetings and provide facilities to enable the public to do so. So, step number 2 in amending the Zimbabwean Constitution. Parliament must invite you and me to express our views on the proposed bill, and we can contribute to this discussion via public meetings organized by Parliament itself and also via written submissions. Subsection 5 then says that a constitutional bill must be passed at its last reading in the National Assembly and the Senate by the affirmative votes of the 2/3 of the membership of each house. Meaning to say, if you want to amend the constitution, you need a 2/3 majority first in the House of MPs called National Assembly, then secondly, the House of Senators called Senate. This is why ZANU-PF desperately needed a 2/3 majority, which explains the Chavang recalls. It's all falling into place. Subsection 6 then says, where a constitutional bill seeks to amend any provision of Chapter 4 and Chapter 16A, within 3 months after it has been passed by the National Assembly and the Senate in accordance with subsection 5, it must be submitted to a national referendum, and B, if it's approved by a majority of the voters voting at the referendum, the Speaker of the National Assembly must cause it to be submitted without delay to the President, who must assent and sign it forthwith. Keep in mind that Chapter 4 talks about the Declaration of Rights and Chapter 16 talks about the laws that govern agricultural land. Now, let's go to the juicy part. Ndopa ni nyaya yese papapa, ndopa ni video rese. Subsection 7, which says the following: notwithstanding any other provision from this section, an amendment to a term limit provision, the effect of which is to extend the length of time a person may hold or occupy any public office, does not apply in relation to a person who held or occupied that office or an equivalent office at any time before the amendment. That simply means that any president who amends the Constitution to extend term limits cannot benefit from that amendment. That amendment does not apply to a sitting or a former president. This was simply done to discourage sitting presidents from tampering with term limits. A constitutional amendment, the effect of which is to extend term limits, does not apply to a sitting president. So therefore, constitutionally speaking, as things stand, it's impossible for ED to run again. In order for him to run again, he must amend the Constitution twice. Firstly, he has to either remove or extend term limits via a referendum, and then remove the clause that says that sitting and former presidents can't benefit from a term limit extension. Furthermore, subsection 8 says that subsections 6 and 7 must not be amended in the same constitutional bill, nor may amendments to both those subsections be put to the people in the same referendum. Subsection 9 goes on to say that Section 328 may be amended only by following procedures set out in subsections 3, 4, 5, and 6, as if this section were contained in Chapter 4 of the Zimbabwean Constitution. So it seems to me ED will have to do 2 separate referendums. Firstly, to extend the term limit, and then secondly, to allow himself to qualify under that new term limit extension. That is the true spirit and intention with which this clause was written, to totally make it unappealing for sitting presidents to extend term limits. And if my interpretation is 100% accurate, then we will need legal experts to tell us whether it's constitutionally possible for a government to run 2 separate referendums to amend one section of the Constitution within one presidential term. But keep in mind, this is ZANU-PF, so anything goes. The truth of the matter is that if ED really wants a 3rd term, and he feels like he has sufficient backing from the military, then he will go for it. No constitutional clause formed against ZANU-PF shall prosper. The sad thing about the law is that it's open to different interpretations, particularly a constitution like ours, which has so many convoluted and vague clauses with so many loopholes which ZANU-PF takes advantage of more often than not. So, if the appetite for an ED 3rd term is high in ZANU-PF and the military, then rest in peace, Constitution. The question is, can we as citizens stop ED? Of course we can, but we won't. Why? Because we are divided. I mean, have you seen the state of the opposition recently? ED made sure to destroy the opposition first and then capture parliament. The judiciary was already captured. And if ED has done his homework with the military, then it means the citizens are the only ingredient left for ED to cook yet another constitutional amendment. But how can ED rally the nation behind him in his 3rd term bid Well, those in rural areas are easy to deal with. Just give them freebies and a bit of violence and voila, it's done. And as for the young people in urban areas, just use a few corrupt mbingas who they idolize. Pamper celebrities with expensive cars and be sure to get them to swear their allegiance to ED publicly before giving them cars. Make it so that many top influential celebrities will start throwing themselves at you, literally. And before you know it, many young people now will aspire to become part of ED's campaign in the vain hope of getting freebies, free cars and free meals. Poverty is a tool used by authoritarian regimes to keep people dependent on the political elite. And with the absence of a vibrant opposition, the referendum route all of a sudden seems plausible. And of course, it doesn't have to worry about the structures of ZANU-PF because they are useless when it comes to decision making. They are only useful for campaigning. Key decisions in ZANU-PF are made by a few individuals. And as ED put it in 2010, zoto zine mazera. Kune matara anogagwa nevakuru panyaya dzematongegwo enyika. The military is the only institution that can realistically stop ED if it so chooses. The people or the citizens can't stop ED without the help of the military. Zimbabweans are too laid back to start a revolution on their own. So if ED can somehow strike a deal with the military to allow him to stay on, then I don't see the citizens stopping him. Because the citizens have two options. Either 1. Stop ED via referendum, or 2. If he rigs the referendum, stop him via revolution. But as I said before, Zimbabweans are too soft as wool to start a revolution. We are at least a generation away from starting a revolution on our own without the backing of the military. So at the end of the day, it's not a question of what does the constitution say, because the constitution means nothing to ZANU-PF. They will always find a way around it. The question is, if ED really wants a third term, will the military allow him to run? Will he be able to carry out a successful referendum, especially given the fact that ZANU-PF has never won a referendum on its own? Well, whatever happens, I'll be here to marinate you with all the details without fear or favor, because on this platform, we say it as it is. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share.